Recently, Games Workshop has resurrected a faction long thought lost to us. The Squats, now known as the Leagues of Votann, have come back. It would seem they've been hiding, mining, biding their time in the countless millennia since they last took part in the greater workings of the galaxy. But now, as their great ancestor cores are failing, the Votann have stepped back out onto the galactic stage and are making their presence felt. But was this a good idea? In a galaxy populated by more dangers and horrors than ever before, could the Votann have made a terrible error? This evening on Pod Save the Imperium, I am joined by Adam, Danny, and Tom to discuss that very question. Tom, we're going to start with you.
So, one of the key things to remember about the Votan's decision to move from the galactic core, so starting first with this understanding that the the leagues of Votann or the kin host, the kindred, have not really been on the galactic stage because for the most part, their en masse societies, their kin hosts, their leagues have been in the galactic core. And a brief primer on astrophysics will tell you that the center of a galaxy or a galactic core is the most volatile of all possible places to be. It is generally got the newest, brightest, hottest suns, the most cataclysmic events, from an astrophysics standpoint, and it's very difficult to do anything there if you even as an advanced spacefaring race. There's a reason, for example, the Imperium doesn't really do too much there, is because they've got massive holdings elsewhere that are more that human beings are more acclimated to. Even crazy worlds like Krieg are probably less hostile than planets you'd find being forged in the galactic center. So the Votann, being the descendants of a spacefaring race, thousands and thousands of years ago, they can trace their roots back to ancient mining expeditions from Terra. So they know they're a offshoot of human beings. It's funny, as the text will point out, it's because of this very notion that they distrust humanity even more, knowing their origins. They've evolved as humans do, time over time, given their grueling assignments, being part of these mining expeditions, incredibly dangerous. Those who survive passed on traits and genetics that hardened them and made them more physically durable and tough than the standard human. And this separation also, through the dramatic events of the Horus Heresy, I'm not sure, my memory fails me. I'm not sure if the original ancestors of the leagues left prior in the Age of Night, or if they left around the time of the Horus Heresy. But it's been millennia. But whenever they did leave, it was so removed from everything else that was happening that they kind of stayed there as one would, having traveled so far along. And thus the Leagues of Votann came to be, and they evolved, and they took this kind of hardship to heart. So that's, kind of first off, just a general primer. They're a new faction that are not as easily accessible to understand as, say, Space Marines, which we've talked about copious amounts of times, and generally everybody has a pretty good sense of their background. So rough primer, but being there in the Galactic Forge, they have access to lots of minerals, lots of metals, and various resources that other parts of the galaxy would not necessarily have or have in abundance. So the question really does become, why leave? There's historical examples throughout the Imperium's history where they've, of course, know of the League's existence very briefly, and you see on planets like Necromunda or Vordyne, the colloquial named squats. That's an Imperium term to address them. It's a term they never really refer to themselves as. So it's not like they're just all of a sudden here out of nowhere that nobody knows about them, but it's now more about they're here in force, they're here in leagues, they're here in kin hosts in copious amounts. So kind of, again, why this question if they're in one of the densest, richest parts of the galaxy, and their motto is essentially to just toughen everything out. Why would they leave? Why would they choose to do that? And my thesis is really that they didn't have a choice. So again, going back to how I started this segment with the timing. The timing of everything is very important because we're talking about an Imperium that's post, the rift opening, the Citrix Maledictum. We're in the new Imperium. Robute Gilliman is leading the Indomitus Crusade. Lots of things are happening at a scale that's just almost impossible to comprehend given, close to 10,000 years of general stagnation on all sides of the galaxy. Unless you consider a Tyranid feast an interesting distraction. And in the process of that Citric Maledictum, things basically got jumbled, right? It's kind of like you took the galaxy, this ant farm, and shook it all up, and everything ended up where it was not supposed to be, and everything. And that's very much due to the nature of the warp. Things got moved and pushed around where they shouldn't. The events of Battlefleet Gothic 2 are precisely about how Admiral Spire is chasing down an enemy when he gets thrown into the warp, and all of a sudden now he's 3,000 years in the future, and Gilliman's leading an army, right? And so this rift has opened very close. We're talking right near, next door to where they've been for thousands of years. And pouring out of this are crazed chaos worshippers, chaos demons, war bands of orcs, displaced humans, and as far as we're aware, humans are not generally the ask questions, shoot later type of variety. And then if I didn't say orcs, I'll say orcs again, because orcs, and even though the leagues have traditionally always dealt with orcs are everywhere. We're talking in numbers that were greater than they had to have dealt with before. Eldari, Tau, slipstream ships all of a sudden getting spit out here. Every faction kind of is getting jumbled and thrown around. So there's this massive upheaval in terms of this balance of you're over there, I'm over here. And seeing this kind of dynamic shift, the leagues don't really have a choice to stay there anymore. Which is ironic considering you'd think they'd stay and defend their holdings. They now have really this obligation to find better lands, to find better holds, to find better places for their kin host to be. Not just because they have the Citrix Maledictum right next door, but also because they need to fan out into a galaxy and stake claims for themselves, prospect out new holdings, and hold them in order to survive. In many philosophies and in many historical examples or anecdotes, what have you, there's this constant idea that stagnation is death. Movement is life, stagnation is death. If you don't keep moving, you're going to die. And sitting and holding and staying put for so long can only really help you for so long. And given all of this upheaval, while the natural reaction, the easiest, safest reaction, is to think and to wait and stay, that kind of thought process, given the culture and the traditions of the Votann, would never occur. And in this case, it behooves them to not, because they need to go out. They need to go out and do the hard thing, and not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right. Danny, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I understand that the situation for them has changed, right? That with the Maelstrom and the Rift, there's just things are crazy, and they are suddenly dealing with threats that they're pretty much haven't really been planning on dealing with. But I think in how horrifically deadly the world of 40K is, that the best defense is just to be unnoticed, right? And their home in the galactic core is very defensible because of the kind of stellar cartography and astrophysics involved of being around so many concentrated stars. And so I think their decision to kind of to come out more, to kind of have a show of force, not just have their kind of random traders making contact with people, but actually kind of revealing themselves to be a galaxy level player, right? Is and is going to invite more attention because even if you get a space hulk full, a rock full of orcs that show up near your territory, even if they destroy a planet or a piece of a territory of yours, if they think like, well, this is all there was, they're going to they're going to go somewhere else, right? They're going to probably be like, well, let's, see what else. And since every, except for Chaos and the Votann, every race basically navigates the war on a whim, on chance, there's a good chance that the orcs just end up somewhere else, not anywhere near the Votann sphere of influence. So, it's just one of those things of, people, their codex talks about this, that for a long time, people just thought when they would run into them of like, oh, you're just some super tiny minor civilization and this is basically all you are. And okay, cool, how quaint, whatever. But, when the Imperium and the, especially when the Imperium and the orcs find out like, oh no, there's a whole other giant society here that, have extremely advanced technology and weapons, they're going to take notice, right? Because the orcs are always looking for a new fight, right? And the Imperium is super xenophobic, right? And whether they classify them as abhumans that are, officially sanctioned abhumans like Ogren or Ratlings, which even if they did that, it's not like the Votann are going to yield to Imperial control, right? They're not going to be like, okay, well, we'll join the Imperium and we'll, reunite with our long lost human ancestors. They're going to be like, no. And so what happens when the Imperium hears no? Right? Like in all the recorded fluff and lore in this universe, what happens when the Imperium hears no? They find a way to make that a yes, or just make it so you can't say no anymore, right? Like, so I think it's just in the grim darkness of this universe and in this setting, because it is grim dark. It's meant to be dour. It's meant to be a parody of life, right? It's meant to be dystopian to the point of comedy very often, right? That the best thing to do if you find yourself in this world is to make sure no one notices you. And they did that for a while, and that was probably the smartest tactic, right? And so going out and really revealing themselves, again, not just to be like, hey, we're here, but also we can threaten things. We can put up a fight. We have advanced technology. We're tough. We are not pushovers, is only more reason for the Imperium to think they're a threat, for the Eldari to start getting involved, right? Because you know how the Eldar are, right? Especially the craft worlds, like, Eldrad. It's like, oh, here's new players for me to play, right, for my own ends. And if you're a minor civilization that maybe you occupy a solar system, oh, who cares? You're not really useful. Oh wait, you are a kind of major force. They're definitely going to get involved and definitely try and manipulate you, right? So I think overall it was just probably best that they stayed in the core and just did their best to defend what they had and keep themselves hidden for as long as possible.
Yeah, thinking about it, I was coming back to the idea of like the dark forest theory over and over, where like the Votann are like living out the dark forest theory in Warhammer 40k right now. Where it's like, hey, we weren't broadcasting our existence to anybody, but now we kind of have to, or we're choosing to, and we're going to see how that plays out for the Votann in real time. So, like, it's always the idea of like, anybody who doesn't know what the dark forest theory is, it's the idea that like there's a lot of alien life out there. It's just not dumb enough to let everybody else know it's there because there's something worse. Like Obi-Wan said, or no, Qui-Gon said, there's always a bigger fish, right? So like if you broadcast your existence, you're going to get eaten. And so I kept coming back to that thought while we were prepping for this episode, and I was thinking about it. Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
It's a little bit of a mix of the two. I'm not sure they should have come out as much as they have. I think with they're showing in Necromunda what might have been a necessity to get some materials that they don't need. So you have the mining guild, and maybe that's all they saw. I think if they expanded in that way, it may have been better. That way they can so the main holds could fortify their position, hunker down, and then maybe send a few miners out to different sectors or planets or whatever, and just get what they need to get from them. Obviously, the Imperium knows that they exist because they know that squats were on Necromunda. But now that they have come out and really basically flexed their muscle and shown what they can do, yeah, right now the Imperium is probably like, okay, well, we'll let them be because they're in an indirect way they're helping us deal with this problem right now of the Citrix Maledictum. But if that problem ever goes away, they may want to look at that new technology over there. Why is their bolter better than ours? Things of that nature. If they had stayed with just sending out the miners and things like that, then they probably wouldn't have that big of an issue and wouldn't really care. Now to Tom's point of the Citrix being basically at their front door, I think they could have just gone down deeper or put up a better or shore up their defensives, even if they go down deep, as long as they don't dig too deep, because we don't know what's in that core, just in case. But I think in this instance there probably could have been somewhat of a compromise without having to come out full blast out of the gates. Tom would know better than I in terms of how they burst onto the scene, but I think that if they maybe started with the mining, gave them the Imperium or Eldar or even Tau, even though they're competitors, some help, maybe materials and maybe technology, depending what concessions they could get, and maybe float the idea of like, hey, we have these guys that can fight really good. If you want to use them, we don't have too many, but they could maybe maintain their secrecy of their homeworlds better than they do now, because eventually the Imperium, at the very least, is going to want to know what's going on with that technology and might try, by hook or by crook, to get some of that technology and have a look at it.
Yeah, I was thinking the biggest threat to them is probably the Mechanicum. Like, Mechanicum's obsessed with the STCs, right? And all this technology, and like the ancestral cores are like, in my understanding at least, the ancestral core is like a super STC, right? It's like all the STCs possible combined and better, right? So like, I think the Mechanicum at the least is going to be like, whoa, okay, let's what's going on with these guys? I want to see what kind of technology they have. These ancestral cores you're talking about sound an awful lot like these STCs we're always trying to find. But if they view themselves as being technologically superior, they might view themselves as stronger. So maybe that's not a concern to them. I don't know. How much, Tom, we'll go back to you next. How much do you think the failing of the ancestral cores plays into this?
That's a good question. I think it might play a good part in it. The reason being that the ancestral cores have generally been, for the Votann, their kind of source of truth, with the Grimnirs being the closest to that, to interpret the will of the cores and to try and, give them directions on how to run society and everything like that. That said, there have been noted differences between cores of different kindred or kin hosts. And over time, the core's decline has kind of left the Votann slightly rudderless, maybe, and not with an active directive at their hands, as opposed to like maybe more of a stagnant or this is the last thing we remember being said, which is interesting too, especially considering the Votann are really steeped in tradition. They're very much steeped in these various simple truths, these very simple grim outlooks on life. And it's funny because hearing Danny and Adam talk about their sides and their views of things as well as yours, John, I kind of think that they don't have a choice, not because the Citrix maledictum now as much, but I think that they don't have a choice because of who they are. And so in this sense, I'll go to what Danny said about this being a grim, dark setting, a mockery of life, so depressing and dystopian that it's almost comical. And what wouldn't fall into that than a race that's admirable, that's striving out on their own, and for the most part avoiding all of these problems, that then, because of who they are and which has led them to be safe, is now pointing them off the ledge. And in that sense, you could argue whether it will be successful or not. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Which, to actually tie that into what Adam was saying, the leagues, remember, we're talking about the 41st, 42nd millennium, and the leagues have been around at least, the last 10,000 years, if not more. And how humanity has interacted with them may have changed over time. But if you look at a lot of their technology, there are elements of various other things, right? So beam technology might be something that they have. It might be in a development they've made on tau technology. There's definitely tau technology present if you look at their ion beamers and their design, even on the models themselves. There's various similarities. Same with plasma. I mean, they're not using Imperium plasma, I'll tell you that. They are using bolters and bolt cannons that are enhanced, better versions than what the Imperium has. So they kind of have done this almost water cast treatment, right? Because we see this with the Tau, of slowly infiltrating and gaining information and technology through trade to then improve themselves and their efforts. So in a way, they kind of already been doing what Adam suggested. What Adam, I think, to refine his point, would be keep doing that, right? Keep doing that and really refine yourselves and protect yourselves until you're like A-okay. And I think too that there is the Imperium is so vast that there's definitely the Imperium as a collective whole has no idea how big the leagues are, but there is definitely proof that portions of the Imperium know exactly how big they are and what they're dealing with. Some of the text cites that humanity has often been the enemy of the leagues as their allies. From Inquisitors to intolerant space marines, they'll look at a Votann and say, that's an alien, that's a mutant, that's a heretic, whatever. We got to get rid of it. The Mechanicus is quoted to have, basically viewing them as like superstitious tech shaman with super powered technology they can't possibly understand because we're the Mechanicum. We have ancient machines and histories of great power that we can barely understand. Their technology is clearly powerful. There's no way they're smarter than us. We are of the machine. So therefore, they must be eliminated. I mean, to speak to your Mechanicum point, they absolutely do view them as a threat. And then when it comes to Tau and Eldari, it's very much like, all right, I like you, but stay here. Let's just parlay it and everything. But there's a really great line that I think kind of ties this all together towards the very end of the text, which is this concept of far space. And far space is a simple truth that the Votann have about anything that is far away from here, right? Once again, that kind of simple but deep concept of like, it sounds kind of, rudimentary, but there's a whole meaning and culture behind it, to the point where, the leagues definitely know what's out there. They definitely know what surrounds them all across the galaxy because they've had people who've gone out and come back. And just as they've had people who've gone out and regretted it, and probably so because they never did come back. And it's probably not because they found a nice home. In some cases it is, except that time you get a postcard. And there's a saying amongst the kin that there's the expression of, he sailed to far space. It's a fool's errand. It's used throughout many holds to mean that a kin has embarked upon a dangerous course of action they will likely regret. But there are others amongst the hearthspace, however, who believe that, Just as the kin hailed from the depths of far space so millennia before, so their ancestral roots and their future lie out there in the greater dark. This kind of return to their origins, this we came to here from so far away and became what we are. Our future is that same thing as well. And for a culture that's very steeped in tradition, very steeped in their ways, and views hardship as a test, views obstacles as a challenge, not as a deterrent, I think that's a recipe for, it may not matter whether it was smart of the Votann or not to do this. I think it might have been that as a culture, they really didn't have a choice in the matter.
All right, so like I was thinking earlier about like the dark forest theory thing. I forgot that when I originally read about the ancestor cores and how like the Grimnir have to interpret what they say now and stuff, and like they're slowly failing. I also got the idea like, I don't know if have any of you read The Postman? Not seen the movie, but read the book The Postman. So like in The Postman, there's that one part where like he goes to this town, and in The Postman they had right before the apocalypse these super smart artificial intelligence computers, right? And there's in this town one that's still working, but it's not still working. it like has the lights are going, but like somebody has to like interpret what that says, right? So like there's somebody there that's telling you what the computer's trying to tell you, and then when it's wrong they're like, oh, we just didn't interpret it right. We just didn't understand what it was saying, right? So like almost like the man behind the green curtain, right? Or the behind the mask in the Wizard of Oz. It's like a similar idea. I was just that spoke to my soul when I was like, oh yeah, because The Postman's a good book, whereas the movie was terrible. But that whole concept of like we have this super advanced computers, and oh, we actually have one that still works. It would be really interesting if they would do that with Votann.
I think something that Votann kicks in to kind of go off with this, with maybe again makes it they have to, is that these are these are highly intelligent AI systems that have literally thousands of years of information, and some of them even know the true origins of the Votann and what the dark age of technology looked like, and all of this stuff. But it brings up an interesting question of, we have this assumption that because it's a computer, it can retain information like that and can last through eons without any kind of psychological damage, right? And it brings up the idea of that's not true, right? That they're hitting their limit, that they're the intelligence within them, the sentience, because it is sentient but not omniscient, right? Or not omnipotent and omniscient, it can't contain that much information and just starts breaking down, because it literally cannot bear the weight of eternity, right? It just can't process that much information. So this is common in all the Votann, is that they understand that their ancestor cores are glitching, right? They're not as fast as they used to be. They're not what they should be. And so that becomes, if that's the center of your literal civilization, that it's becomes a desperate call, right? It's a desperate time, which is they have to find a way to make it work. And that means, you have to go out there, you have to go into the dark forest now, because either way you're going to die. So do you die waiting for the inevitable, or do you die maybe finding a chance to save yourself, right? So I think that's I think leads a lot of I think it lends a lot of weight to Tom's position, right? That it's not necessarily it was a smart idea, but maybe it was the only idea, right? It was really the only choice they had.
It's like a collection of factors, right? Not just any one thing. Adam?
Yeah, I think even if they had to do it, I think there could have been a more measured way. I don't think it was an immediate need, even though it was a slow degradation for the Votann and their cores. Like with anything, anybody that's had a computer for a while, you can usually tell when it's starting to go. And that should, anyway, give you enough time to either fix it, plan for a new one, or at least take measures to correct it somehow, or And I think in this case, I think the Votann are taking taking it to an extreme in terms of the measures, or at least maybe some of them. We don't know the status of every one of their holds, but we do know it's happening overall. Some are probably degrading faster than others. So I think it depends. I think for the most part, I probably would have just taken stock, and but that's also assuming they know. So if they start, like you said, John, interpreting what the machine says as opposed to figuring out if it's actually starting to break or not, who knows? Even then, I still think slow and steady wins the race, not all of a sudden coming out there and saying, here we are, and then just starting with guns. And so I started blasting type of attitude.
So you're saying that they probably have to do it, but
probably, but at a
probably
slower pace.
Slower pace to do it. Okay.
Slow, like I said, slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, you're not the rabbit in that story. You're the turtle.
Yeah.
Anybody have final thoughts for this evening?
No.
We're good? All right. I mean, that kind of was the final thoughts for everybody, right? So.
I will say that my final thought was looking at the ancestor cores. It reminded me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the omniscient computer planet.
Yeah.
And they ask it a question, and it says, give me thousands of years to calculate it. And they come back, and it's, well, what is the answer? And it says 42.
Yep.
Very much got some of those
question?
vibes.
Oh, no, you got to build this other one for the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It does have those vibes.
Just a little bit.
We appreciate you joining us for our discussion this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. You can follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Pod Save the Imperium, and stay tuned for more episodes.